A bit about me and about the company. So Kochava is, and I recognize that a little challenging to read some of this text from back there, at least it is for me. I'll give you the speaker notes. We're 150, 160 people. We're based in Spokane. We have offices here in the States, not only in our headquarters, but also sales offices in San Francisco, LA, New York, Seoul, Beijing, Singapore, and Dublin. We have some of the largest brands and agencies using our technology, and what Kochava does is it measures impressions and clicks from the digital advertising ecosystem, and then it associates or attributes those impressions and clicks to some kind of interaction or conversion, which results in an advertiser caring about the outcome. So we're effectively a system that tracks the outcomes of these digital advertising efforts so they can understand the ROI. That's how we started. We started 7 years ago. We're bootstrapped, we're profitable, and again, we're based at a standpoint. In addition to that, we've ended up building a variety of tools on top of that platform based on customer demand. Scott mentioned some of that, which is around our fraud mitigation products, because we're at the nexus of supply and demand. We can see really interesting patterns from a machine learning perspective to see outliers where fraud is being perpetrated, and in aggregate you can see it, but on a particular account basis you really can't. And so we're in a unique position to see fraud and mitigate it and knock it out of the equation. Another one of the big innovations that we've built is effectively what's called a mobile-first DMP. And I'm doing a little bit of translation because this is like another language when you're not in the advertising space. DMP is a data management platform, and it's effectively a database that has a whole bunch of devices which really associate to end user audiences and attributes about them so that you can target the people you care about. And if you think about buying media on Facebook or on Google, they kind of have an embedded DMP because they're a first-party offering. They know lots of things about end users, and so they know attributes about them. Well, if you're not using Facebook and Google, there aren't really large-scale independent DMPs that work well, and we built one, and we have over 4.3 billion device IDs in the system, which is astounding. I mean, just astounding. And they're all first-party licensed to us, and we can license to our customers. So we have people like Marriott, BBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, Netflix, a lot of media entertainment, a lot of game companies. You can imagine a lot of feedback loop and digital advertising on game companies, and tons of QSR, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Dunkin' Donuts, and they care about things like, yes, promoting their app, but they also want to associate when someone goes into the polygon of the actual Dunkin' Donuts location, and then link that back to the campaign that drove that user to install the app. And we do all that measurement for them. And that's all owned by the customer. We don't own that data, but it helps them make their decisions around their digital ads. And that's all in our system. So, to make all this possible and to make the digital advertising ecosystem work, it is a tremendously opaque supply chain. And it looks relatively simple in that you have end users who are on the other side of this publisher box on the right, and ultimately those end users are sought after by advertisers who are on the far left. And there's all these effectively rent-taking entities that pull part of the media spend and make it difficult to have a better ROI on your media spend. And on top of that, fraud can be rampant with every single one of the additional layers in between the buyer and the seller. And so an awful lot of middlemen, an awful lot of opacity, and we're talking about billions of transactions a second. So it's awfully easy to make a lot of money in a lot of little ways, and that's the core of the issue. This is the same depiction, but with real company logos between the advertiser and the consumer. Think about how many places, if you're an advertiser like Unilever or McDonald's, how many places have your data? A whole bunch of companies have your data. How many places have the opportunity to potentially have discrepancy of data about the performance of a campaign? A whole bunch of opportunities between these pieces. And so the splintering and the that separation make it tremendously hard. And in 2015, that was effectively 4 years into being in Kochava and being in the center of all of this nexus, we became familiar with blockchain technology, which was really early in the grand scheme of things. And in that process, we said, gosh, this could be amazing to transform the supply chain of digital ads with crypto proofs and with a real mechanism to glue the supply chain together on a holistic system. But if we did it, we'd have to make it open, because no one's going to trust some framework that we build and we ask people to license it. We have to make it free, so we don't have some arbitrary monopolistic fee that they have to pay us just because they want to ride on these rails. And we'd have to make it so that effectively any inventory can be made available to any demand, and it would be transparent. And so we set about doing that, and certainly we don't have Unilever on deck to start buying tomorrow. We've had lots of conversations with them, but this is from Pritchard, our CMO at Unilever, and I'm gonna mess up if I try to go on memory, but we can't continue to prop up the digital supply chain, which at times is a little better than a swamp in terms of transparency. So outside of Samsung, Unilever is like the #1 advertiser worldwide. They all kind of compete between P&G, Unilever, Samsung, lots and lots of dollars. And there's been lots of press around people's desire to kind of separate out. So for those not in the ad tech space, and I would argue even, it's difficult to appreciate the severity of this without a simple illustration. So we put one together. I've used this a lot in public. If you have $1 of ad spend put to work, effectively you've got 3 cents that is the most potent 3 cents to the publisher to deliver that ad. And this is the way in which that gets unpacked. Now, there's certainly need for middleware. There's certainly need for mediation. But when you have 7 layers of it, it tends to eat away at the ROI because there's all these rent or toll-taking locations. So these are the problems that we were setting out to solve. And early on in that eye chart graphic, I talked about the different industry vendors that are in the space. I spoke specifically about the pockets of data where your data is going to get effectively leached out across the ecosystem. Even if you don't worry about that from a lot of different vendors, it's still happening at scale with Facebook and Google. The way things operate with Facebook and Google, and they're great partners. I've got great things to say about them, but the raw reality is that they're the 800-pound gorillas, and so they can say, if you're going to buy media from me, you have to give me all of your signal, because I need to be able to tell if I'm moving the needle for you. Well, by virtue of getting all the signal, they also have all the signal for which they can do better targeting for the next person who's maybe in the same industry. And so the aggregation of signal is happening at an ever-increasing scale across 2 very large companies that doesn't respect the reality that that data may be owned by the advertiser. And it does respect it because there's legal documents that say otherwise, but my point is that competitive advantage and the data behind that leaches away very quickly. And so what we've built is XCHNG. As Scott mentioned, it's really the 3rd leg of the stool. And the premise is we don't buy and sell media with XCHNG as a first-class actor. Rather, XCHNG represents the rails or the plumbing upon which any media source can make their inventory available to any demand source. And it's on the same common crypto-backed open system for which we don't take some license fee. Now you may be wondering, well, why in the hell are you doing this? How do you make money? Because the motivations and incentives aren't making sense. So remember, Kochava is a business that helps with targeting and audience insights, as well as measurement, as well as analytics, and a variety of things on top of this data. If the industry transforms to care more about their data, care more about transparency, care more about efficiency, and they use a common system, then it's easier for us to continue to grow our position on top of that for the purposes of measurement and targeting and all of our other commercial services. So our position is we support our customers pre-blockchain and we support our customers post-blockchain. But it's better for the customer if it's backed by blockchain provided that they don't have to know how that all works. It's got to be super simple. So in the process of building all of this, we were like, well, we build our unified audience platform, we build our collective product, and we're going to add Exchange, and it's this underlying, underpinning infrastructure. Awesome. We start building it, and we realize that there's some really interesting IP that we've built. And while we really like this open strategy, like we talked about, this IP could actually be used for other industries outside of digital advertising. Now, we don't want to lose focus. We don't want to get distracted. At the same time, we don't want to build all of this inside of some digital advertising system for which it can't be applied elsewhere. So let's be thoughtful as we build this and create a nice, clean abstraction layer. And in so doing, we created our core blockchain. We call it Mazzaroth. Mazzaroth is a Hebrew term for constellation. Kochava is a Hebrew term for star. So the association of this is that a decentralized ledger and blockchain framework is really a basis of a whole bunch of stars out there, which is a constellation. And so it was an appropriate name extension. So that core blockchain really enables a whole bunch of other, what we call channels, to serve other ecosystems. So it's effectively like a blockchain as a service system for which blockchains can get created for other channel owners. So if you have a digital music licensing idea and you want to put it on the blockchain, you can actually do that without forking Ethereum, without forking EOS, without having gas costs of an Ethereum or an EOS, without having a segmented tools problem where you have one tool for this thing and the actual blockchain over here and a challenge of a deterministic programming language that no one knows called Solidity, except for people that are in blockchain and they're super expensive to hire. So there's all these aspects that we kind of incorporated into this. And in the case of Exchange, Exchange is a channel on top of our core blockchain, just like any other channel would be, where in our environment, we've mapped the supply chain of digital advertising, where we watch the workflow of an ad from an ad served, measured, rated, and paid for. For other I made a comment earlier about how what matters is it has to be easy. So you shouldn't have to know anything about blockchain. It should just work. And so what we've built is a variety of dashboard technology components, which are all open sourced as well. So a DSP can incorporate Exchange into their buying system, or it can be inside of a measurement vendor's system. And the whole idea is that it's all a unification of protocol. So because of Scott's kind of thesis around really wanting to build a center point of blockchain and DLT technologies in this area, I thought it'd be useful just to have a few slides specifically on Mazzaroth and some of the attributes about it, because literally we're looking for initial channel partners. When I say channel, I don't mean like go-to-market channel partners, but people who want to build channels on this system and talk about it a little bit. So you've got the core kind of global network of Mazzaroth, and then you've got these channels which could be different industry segments. And there's a number of things that we've done in the platform that are kind of core services. So hyperdimensional channel framework, high performance gossip protocols. We built our own gossip protocol, our own consensus engine, our own smart contract execution system, which is all in WebAssembly, which means you can actually have higher order programming languages that compile into WebAssembly, and then our VM can execute them. So it's a fundamentally different technology approach than what other blockchains have done. There are some people talking about that approach. But then obviously an integrated ledger. So if you see Mazzaroth, that's one chain. Each channel is in fact its own set of chains. So if you're a channel creator, you can just roll your own network without having to necessarily fork something. It just happens. And we're working with some strategic partners in the cloud space and in the infrastructure space to have predefined Mazzaroth VM instances that they can spin up and then deploy. So that associates that kind of ease of just setting up a blockchain for the enterprise or for the public. Having this approach also means it's decentralized consensus. So in every other blockchain, every node performs consensus on every transaction. In our system, nodes perform consensus for the channels upon which they're subscribed to, which means it's like limitless in its performance and scale. We did that because in digital advertising, we're dealing with billions of transactions a second, and you have to be able to have this highly sharded environment. The nice thing is, if you're in the commodities trading space and you want to back it by blockchain, this is the system that you can actually do it and it will perform. So high performance marketplace dynamics are certainly ones that are potential candidates. So really cool tech across the stack, all built kind of from scratch. These are not kind of forked projects that have turned into Frankensteinian outcomes where there's, you know, an arm hanging out of a neck in the stack. This is a purpose-built system, and we had to do that to be able to support what we were doing. We've also built directly into the system our own IDE. So this is called Mazra Studio. Today, you can actually write Rust code, compile into WASM, which is WebAssembly, deploy across a network, and execute decentralized smart contracts, and not do anything in terms of setting up nodes, which is really interesting. That's not a end-to-end process that happens today. And there's some really interesting implications in doing that. So we've constantly kind of cross-compared ourselves with where does this compare to a roll your own fabric or a Tendermint with Cosmos or with Neo, Ethereum. And what's interesting is the combination of our consensus approach, our gossip approach, our smart contract approach, and our hyper-sharded ledger framework. It's just a night and day difference. And so this is very much catered to developers or entrepreneurs who want to build something and not futz around with what it takes to get there because of the nascency of maturity in this space, which it is very nascent, which is interesting. So we're executing on Exchange. Exchange is going to be the first channel on Maseroth. Our network is going to be blown out because of Exchange. Think of all the nodes for digital advertising that are going to be part of the network just out of the box, but you can also set up your own for your own channels. But then outside of that, we are talking to a number of folks ranging from functions as a service systems to digital streaming to end user attestation, like digital identity, sovereignty. If you guys are into that space at all, like people own their own data, they contribute it, they earn, they have incentive models. So a number of really interesting tech components, and if there's anyone both or in the crowd or beyond that is interested in being a channel, we would love to talk to you about that. So with that, there's more info at Exchange, there's more info at Kochava, there's more info at Maseroth, but I'd be more than happy to take questions or talk further. Scott and I spoke before this meeting and really, you know, kind of shared the process for us of really articulating our vision with a white paper, executing, and then watching this last year being so weird in the crypto space. And really what I mean by weird is there's a whole bunch of people that don't have any capacity to execute, but they've got big dreams and they're very excited. And they may have raised a lot of money in an ICO, which makes that problem worse, because then someone who has big dreams and no ability to execute now has a huge budget to do dumb things. And what I think is really interesting about 19 is an opportunity where real execution is going to start happening. And that's the kind of petri dish upon which we're excited about partnering with folks. So thanks for letting me share. And I'm happy to open up questions, or I'm happy to not, whatever you would prefer, sir. Yeah.
So, Charles, quick question. There's a company that kind of seems really well fit to utilize Maseroth, but maybe walk the crowd through what that would actually look like. Is there an automated way they can onboard through
Sure.
the website? Is it a direct contact?
Yeah, Feb 23 or something. So end of Feb, you're going to be able to go in, put in Google credentials, and set up effectively set up an account in the Maseroth Studio and have one of two paths of execution. One is you can set up a basic contract, which is the definition of your channel. This is what's really cool. The contract actually defines the governance framework of the channel. And so you can write all of that, or you can have a basic token contract similar to an ERC-oriented contract with just token movement. Those that are familiar with how you build a basic token contract in Ethereum will totally know how that works and all the kind of core hooks and the templates. We're going to make that, I think, open, but we're already working with commodities trading company, a music-oriented company, and we're not doing exclusives, so it's not like if I bring up an idea and you're like, well, they're already doing that. I mean, it's not, this is a development environment and a BaaS system, so, you know, may the best person win. We're also talking to kind of supply chain in grocery, which is really interesting. Walmart required by November of this year, all produce vendors in the leafy green category to have some traceability with blockchain. They talked about ways in which they suggested that, but at the end of the day, it just has to be traceable. Now, that's a really interesting mandate with the size and scale that Walmart is. And so we're building with a partnership a pretty significant scaled concept of being that implementation for produce for Walmart for that company, with the intent that perhaps it can be used for other produce products and SKUs in Walmart. So those are some really good examples where this can be applicable. And then it's just so kind of going back to your question of how do they get started, Feb 24 is the first step, kind of starting to play around with contracts, getting the docs, moving forward. And I brought Ethan Lewis, who's our Director of Engineering, and really has been the architect for the system. If anyone has any more technical questions, we can hit on those after.
Can you hit on some additional value prop points? So you mentioned, obviously there's a lot of benefit to a developer not having to worry about gas costs, et cetera. Maybe more specifically on transaction speed, you know, if you could comment on.
Good question. Yeah, that's one of the areas that we spent the most time on because we have to be able to support the volumes of digital advertising. Like right now, I think at any given time, our systems at Kochava are handling somewhere between 1 and 3 million clicks a minute. So those aren't even impressions. Those are people that actually chose to click after they saw the impressions, and I don't know the number offhand on the impressions. So at any given time, that's how many clicks our systems are processing, and it's on 150 nodes worldwide that then aggregate in a real-time message bus FIFO system that then processes all this data. And if we were serious about making this work for that environment, we had to make this DLT and consensus framework work in the same way. And so what we've done is we've sharded on a per smart contract basis, which means any level of a smart contract has its own dimension of the chain. And what's compelling about that is that, much like how I spoke earlier, every transaction is not being processed by every node on the same ledger globally. Instead, it's a highly, highly dimensionalized chain that then processes associated. So each I/O in our system is its own tier or dimension of chain off of the exchange channel, which is off the Maseroth world chain. And so what that means is, today, what we've been benchmarking, we think it's going to get better, but each one of those dimensions can handle in a proper global consensus framework 15,000 transactions a second. And so, you know, EOS is like 3, and they're the best out there today. So the fact that we can be multidimensional, we're already at 15, is a pretty interesting composite. Right.
What are the skill sets that you've been able to hire on building a blockchain standpoint? Bring people from afar, do you train from within?
Yeah.
But if you could just comment on that.
That's an awesome question. So when you have your headquarters in Sandpoint and all of your engineering is in Sandpoint, which it is. I mean, we have an office in Portland, which is an engineering office, but you kind of know you're not going to be recruiting locally, if that makes sense. I mean, there may be like a random person that works remotely today and they get excited about having the company be based where they live. But I think what that means is you end up getting really good at qualifying folks who are in different places and really sell the vision on why you are where you are, and that you can do really interesting industry-wide and industry-changing tech that's compelling, and you don't have to spend 2 hours a day in a commute, and you don't have to spend an extra $250 a month for parking for your car, and you don't have to spend, you can effectively earn less but make more because of the cost of living differences. So what I think we've gotten good at is a compositive story for recruiting to help articulate the value of why we chose to be here and that they can participate in that as well. Second, this compositive, you don't need a whole bunch of head chefs. What you need is really good head chefs, and then you need to get good at developing people who have good tenacity, work ethic, and principles around software development. And so we've taken that approach, and I think instead of just saying we're going to hire with the expectation that people are going to be good coming out of the womb, our position is really good people that are here that develop people that are good at principles. And we really started that not because of Sandpoint, it was more because no one had mobile experience, but a whole bunch of people had real-time systems experience. But there was a fair amount of kind of, there wasn't a chance to develop them in new skills unless they were open to being developed. And that's a little bit more challenging when you get someone who is a little bit more experienced in one particular area. So that's been the approach we've taken. The other thing is, if you do a search for blockchain developers, you'll probably get more goofballs than real talent. And it's because they know that this is just an SEO game, and you spend a ton of time qualifying people. In our case, we didn't want blockchain developers. We wanted real-time systems and network protocol engineers, because we're actually building a core blockchain. And so the cool thing is, Mazra Studio, today, you can actually write all in Rust. So there's a whole community of Rust developers, and very soon we're going to have things like C++ and Go and other languages that are high-level languages that you can write in our system that they compile to WebAssembly. And I think that's going to be the transition moment where you don't have to get blockchain developers. It's just strong Go developers. Great. Here's the framework. 150 nodes. So we do, I want to have kind of a clarification point. We do on our core systems, those aren't Mazroth nodes, but your assumption is correct and to assume we're going to be we're going to kind of kickstart the network with our own data center footprint. But we want to make this so that anyone can set up nodes and Yes, I would say but unlike the central nature of Lightning, it's a full DLT framework. But yes, that's right.
But you own all of it.
Today we do, but that's right. But what's unique about Mazroth is you can set up a channel and then say, hey, I want to use any node that's on the network, the global Mazroth network, who's willing to do consensus as validator nodes for my channel. Or you can say, I want to set up a channel, and I'm going to set up my own cloud space, and I want to have it be my own private network. And it's all through the GUI. You don't have to actually go fork EOS and Ethereum to go make that work. Good question. We think that is a natural expectation in terms of incentive models and incentive alignment, and the beauty of allowing the channel creators to set up their governance framework. One of the governance framework elements is choosing what nodes earn for running as validators. So Mazroth doesn't decide that, the channel builder does. And then all of a sudden, you have this really interesting marketplace where there's a whole bunch of channels that have been built, and they're all competing for more compute of all these nodes, and they may be earning in various different ways, but the point is that We don't get in the way of that. Effectively, the channel author gets full governance, incentive frameworks. What's the total, or does it use a token, or does it not even a token at all, and it's just DLT? If it uses a token, is it a never-ending supply of tokens? Is it a finite supply? What's the allocation? And all that is defined in the channel. And it's each channel. That's the kind of slick thing that no one's really done in this space, which is why we've kept our mouth shut.
My company coordinates one of the world's largest networks of fraud and payment professionals.
So payment fraud?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So can you speak a little bit about the applicability of blockchain and your solution to payment fraud and
Yeah.
loyalty fraud and all of that?
Oh yeah, loyalty fraud. So that's something people have asked about. They've said, hey, can I build a channel for a loyalty system? So the loyalty system is all blockchain backed, and then they can have transferability of these points, or maybe they don't, maybe it's a private environment. So in the case of fraud, there's, anytime you have a crypto-backed identity of actors in a system, it's a lot more difficult to be fraudulent without being known. And then therefore you can turn off the faucet faster when that happens, or they just don't rise to the top. So I don't know where you guys fit in the grand scheme of things of payment fraud. In our case, when we talk about fraud, it's always ad delivery fraud. So fake clicks, bots that are fake impressions, that kind of stuff. If you have nodes that are out there that are looking at impressions that are not real nodes, you actually can see that relatively quickly in our system because the crypto backing of all of these data points. And you know which publisher through which those end users are coming through, and then that publisher has a ratings impact. So we invented this notion in Exchange of a ratings provider, which is like a market-driven oracle that looks at all the transaction data and then rates if people are behaving properly, if there's consistent inconsistencies. Great. Similar, you could have a channel in Mazarov that's for your use cases, and you could design, much like how we designed a ratings model in our system for Exchange, you could design that right into that channel and have that be a commercial offering you provide as a company on top of those rails. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you see, so the applicability of cryptocurrency or crypto-based system is pretty clear.
Yep.
What about some traditional payment methods like credit cards that,
Yep.
those rails already exist? How could this be overlaid on that?
Awesome. So I'm going to use the example of Exchange and ads again, not because it's the only example, but it's a good analog. When you buy media, at the end of the day, you're not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to just buy media in a token forever. Like at the end of the day, you have to have fiat, right? At some point, like a real currency. And so just like how we designed in a concept called a ratings provider in Exchange, we designed in a concept called a payment provider, again, market-driven. And the concept there is a payment provider is there so that someone like a WPP or a Unilever or a McDonald's, they're never going to have a crypto wallet. And if they are, it's going to be in like 10 years or something. They want to pay with real cash in a real accounts payable model. So a payment provider allows them to do that, and they extend credit to McDonald's. And then the payment provider effectively is the escrow of those tokens in the system so it operates. And they charge a fee for that because that's a convenience. And that fee is small in comparison to all the other things that this system cleans up. In the same way, you could have a payment provider that is the universal credit card transaction processing payment provider. And so it deals with the risk around credit card fraud, but they extend the tokens that would operate in the system, they take the credit card payment, they settle, and then it gets dealt with. In the same way, you could do that. You could design that kind of a system in this framework. You may say, this is I'm going to design a loyalty framework for which I earn points for these kind of actions, but because my redemption strategy is so awesome, I expect, much like the airlines do, that people may want to pay in for more loyalty points to top up because they want to get something. That would be a model you could apply there. Awesome. Awesome question, just for the mic and the recording. What's our definition of open? Lowercase o, uppercase O. Is there a specific foundation or a group? With Exchange, our position has been it needs to be open source. Exchange needs to be open source. And the license needs to be something that doesn't have a whole bunch of strings attached. At the same time, there are industry organizations that are far more relevant in advertising than the Apache Foundation. And that's like the IAB. The IAB is the Internet Advertising Bureau. People may be familiar with in advertising the Apache Foundation, but at the end of the day, if Exchange is aligned with the IAB, that's what gets them excited. And to your point, we are very closely aligned to the IAB. We were one of the founding members of their blockchain tech lab framework. And then on top of that, what Exchange really is an implementation of a spec called the IAB Open Direct spec. And again, we haven't really talked about that either because we've just been executing as opposed to talking. And that is really compelling because what it means is we've implemented the IAB's own definition in the hooks and interfaces, but it's like a blockchain-backed version of Open Direct.
George, can you comment about the open source side of Maseroth in terms of what you're going to be providing to developers?
Good question.
And then also related is kind of your DevRel strategy, like how are you going to get this out there?
Yep.
Either workshops, conferences, online education?
Great question. So we're really taking an approach on the Maseroth side to be a grassroots, bottoms-up, developer-centric approach. Not a, gee whiz gosh, we're going to transform supply chains at scale. People spent 2018 and discovered how difficult it is to actually get into something blockchain-related, and when they put it together, they were like, is that it? It's not really interesting. I don't know how I'm going to build a business off this. And it's challenging. And so I think there's going to be a greater resonance in 2019 having this kind of end-to-end mechanism so that where you put your IP actually moves the needle in your industry as opposed to all the underlying stuff. With that in mind, our strategy is really around education, universities, and being a framework. Our licensing model for Maseroth is channel-based. So we're taking an approach where we built all this underlying tech so you don't have to, but that's part of our revenue model is to figure out how we license those channels. Not unlike how like Unity is a development studio that's free, and then when you actually deploy it in production, then you pay your license fee. That kind of model. And so building channels will be totally free. That's our current thinking. And then licensing the platform for execution will be the plan. Now, that then brings up the question about open source. We haven't finalized what we want to open source and what we don't want to open source in that underlying system. We've built a tremendous amount of really cool tech, and there's some elements that would be really well served to be open sourced, and other elements where it's kind of like that's the secret sauce of how all this comes together. So we're kind of a TBD on that, which is also why we're not heavily announcing and marketing Maseroth. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the awesome questions, and thanks very much for the opportunity to share more. And look us up if you're in Sandpoint, and if you're interested in any of this stuff, feel free to drop us a line. Is there a question in the back? That's okay. So they were one of the measurement tools? They were a measurement tool? Yes. Yep, okay.
What we found was that it had actually written an algorithm that was dropping off every fourth essentially click, so they had to pay less to do that service. So they were committing fraud.
Yeah.
What tools are in place? What tools do you guys have in place? Because, as you know, with a contract, it's kind of private. You can't really modify a contract after it's operating.
Yep.
So what tools exist to essentially at either the validation level or the data level?
Awesome question. Awesome question, very related to the questions from the center table. We designed into our system the notion of a ratings provider, a payment provider, and we also designed in the notion of a measurement provider. Again, when I talked about how we've built all this stuff and we wanted to find reasons why we were going to make money, if we weren't going to be the oracle or a competitor in the opportunity to be an oracle for those roles, then what the heck are we doing this for? And at the end of the day, someone needs a measurement provider, to your very point. So the question is, what have we done to really glue those pieces together? So a smart contract backs the basic definition of an insertion order, which is things like, this is my flight duration from this date to this date at this time to this time. Here's my frequency capping. Here's my targeted placements across these media sources. This is my pacing strategy, so I don't want to just blow all my ad budget on day one when I've got a 30-day campaign. All those rules are in the insertion order, which are all part of a Ricardian contract. Again, part of the IAB Open Directs. It's conformant to that spec, and it's all lined up. Now, when you do that, then now you have a contract, and there are things that the blockchain technology will validate, i.e. the consensus validation, but there are also things that are business rules that a blockchain is never going to have a future-proofed framework for which validation can occur. And if it did, you'd be forking it or changing it constantly. So that's why we invented this measurement provider role. So when you have this definition of a contract, the first step is you select who is your measurement provider who's on exchange, who's going to validate the smart contract. And the measurement provider, after you authenticate through having an account with that measurement provider, it consumes that insertion order definition, and it says, yep, every term outlined in this IO is something I can measure. So if one of the terms is the alignment of the moon and the sun have to be a certain direction, and the measurement provider can't do it, then that would be an area where the validation check of that smart contract, that's a measurement provider can't confirm that. And so therefore, they won't trigger the event to say, this has been completed, and then write that to the chain. And so that's how we've accomplished that kind of a strategy. It's good technically, and it's also good from a business perspective because it enables us to support our customers as they move to a blockchain-backed framework. Does that answer your question, or do you feel like I went off the reservation?
No, it makes sense, because with validation providers, or the measurement providers, they'll be precisely that, they'll validate any of the outputs.
Exactly, and then write it right to the chain.
Right, they will just need that full access to essentially the impression.
That's right. That's right. And what the neat thing is then, because of our volume support on our framework, every impression on milestone 1 will not be on chain, but on a future milestone, every impression is going to be on the chain. And only those participants in the contract actually can see that data related to them. So if I've got an IO with you and you're my media supplier, you can see the impressions that you're serving, and I can see the impressions that you're serving, and I can also see the impressions that Ethan is serving separately as a separate line item on the same contract. And so it's using the crypto permission-based framework to do that. So there's both transparency and privacy. Because McDonald's never wants other advertisers to know where they're buying. And that's an important thing for them. But they absolutely want transparency between their little miniature supply chain. Awesome. Yeah. So I talked a little about data enrichment early on, and I also talked about data sovereignty. And I think what you're hitting on is, how do I take control of the sovereignty of my data so that it's not in 17 places and being abused and used in ways that I have not consented to? And blockchain, if nothing else, is one of the best, or rather consent and the provability of that consent is no better example of how an immutable general ledger is really applied. There are a ton of companies that are getting into the business of data sovereignty, and I kind of forecast that we're in the Wild West days, and in 24 months, a few leaders are going to pop to the top. And you don't want to be in the data sovereignty system that no one actually uses and listens to, and so once there's a few leaders, then everyone will kind of conform, and that's my theory. I don't know that that's true. No one's kind of written that out. I just assume. So what was important to us with Exchange is that when we build Exchange, let's Heisman the problem of data sovereignty, because if we try to take on this huge project of blockchain enabling the supply chain of digital ads, why would we also want to consume this enormous problem of data sovereignty? Instead, let's build an adapter framework so that data sovereignty can be a first-class actor that interfaces with these insertion orders that are built. So, as an example, I'm buying an IO just like I described. Here are the flight dates, pacing rules, the frequency capping rules, the targeting rules, and then I overlay, because I'm a compliant, responsible company who's afraid of having a lawsuit for targeting people that have not given consent, and I'm a big boy company and I care about things like this, I subscribe to the data sovereignty company over here to overlay that with my targeting rules. And without me getting access to all that data and with the cryptographic proofs of that partner as a first-class actor, my IO is now well-formed, well-defined, and in concert with that verification data. And then that way we skirt the problem of having to be the end-all be-all data sovereignty problem solver, and we create a hook into a very robustly growing ecosystem of who's going to be the winner. And we don't have to have like a horse in that race. Awesome. Digital advertising is complicated, but it's also super fun. There's always problems to solve. So thanks for listening. Awesome. Thanks, sir.